Okay.
Welcome everyone to our ANZREG community webinar, Moving to Primo VE, Why, When and How. We have Meredith, Mooi and Julie Wright presenting this morning about their experiences moving to Primo VE. It's also an opportunity for you to ask questions and share your experiences if you've also moved to Primo VE. Meredith is Systems and Technologies Manager, Information Services at the University of the Sunshine Coast. She has worked in library systems for 20 years, joining USC Library in 2006 as Library Systems Coordinator. Meredith led the implementation project for Alma and Primo in 2015, which was extended to include Alma Digital and Leganto in 2016. Meredith is currently managing the implementation of Esploro to replace the library's research repository. She has a keen interest in knowledge management, project management and shared leadership to facilitate systems innovation and change. Julie Wright is a library systems coordinator who works with departments both within the library and across the University of Adelaide to support Ex Libris products. Julie managed the implementation of Alma and Leganto at the university and provides training to library staff. After spending 25 years working for library software vendors before commencing at the university, Julie has supported Ex Libris products and worked with many of their customers in this region. Julie has a vast wealth of knowledge on configurations and functionality. So thank you, Meredith and Julie, for being part of today's knowledge sharing, and I'll hand over to you, Meredith, to get us started.
Thanks, Sue. So as Sue said, Julie and I are going to present our experiences migrating to Primo VE. So for us, that was as an early adopter, and University of Adelaide more recently. Julie's also going to talk a bit more about the new Go VE self-switch model that Ex Libris has recently announced and will be available later this year. So I'm going to talk about our experiences moving from Primo back office to VE, and that's about the why, the how and the lessons learned, covering just why we did it in terms of the drivers, a bit about the configuration preparation, talk a bit about Go Live Day and also post Go Live issues that we came across. So just quickly about USC, we're a regional university and our main campus is located on the Sunshine Coast, about an hour north of Brisbane. We're very young still, established in 1996, but we've seen rapid growth and expansion. So we're now beginning to consolidate teaching, learning and our programs, but we're also beginning to grow more in the research capabilities. So we implemented Alma and Primo in 2015 and added Leganto in 2016-17. And really having these integrated systems in place has enabled sort of new opportunities for us that weren't available before. And some of those are digitisation of archival collections and also promotion and discovery of those collections. As Sue mentioned in my intro, we're currently implementing Esploro as one of the 3 Australian early adopters. So in terms of Primo VE and the drivers for us was very much establishing digital collections. We've only just started using Alma Digital more for our electronic reserve collections, and we actually had been given or donated archival material relating to the Fraser Island collection, and we really wanted to make the best system to create our first digital collection. And that was either going to be using the existing repository or starting to use Alma Digital. And the latter, i.e. Alma Digital, was going to be dependent on the ability to configure a separate view of Primo. So I had actually visited UNSW to get some advice and help because they'd sort of taken the lead in that area. And they provided a lot of insight and advice on how to do this within Primo back office. But it also highlighted for us how complicated that was. So for us, VE looked like it was going to have a lot of promise. The other side of it, of course, for us in terms of drivers, it provides the benefit of easier management and back-end for configuration. And there's also that immediate indexing without having to worry about publishing pipes, you know, the time lags to get content to discovery. So the project, so I contacted Ex Libris very early on in early 2018, soon after they advised or called for expressions of interest on migrating. And at that time, migrations were scheduled for the second half of 2018, but there was also an opportunity to join as an early adopter. So because of our drivers and really wanting to get that digital collections view up and running, we just jumped at that chance as an early adopter. So our project kicked off in February 2018 and the target go live date was April. So we were assigned a single project manager from Ex Libris, and they were with us throughout the majority of that project. There was weekly project calls, and all the questions and updates were also posted to the Basecamp environment. So the approach, obviously for us, we had two main goals. So that was firstly to replicate all of our current library search. So that was the Primo new UI, which we'd migrated from the classic view probably the year before. So we wanted to replicate all of the layout, the design, the wording, the functionality to make sure it was as seamless as possible. And the other, as I've touched upon, is to create that separate view to promote digital collections. So for our project, the project manager from Ex Libris built the main view or the library search view, and they replicated all the settings that we'd had in the new UI. And then we just clarified requirements via Basecamp discussions. And that was talking about things like the EBSCOPE plugin, the course reserve search, and the other scopes that we had in place that we needed to replicate. So in terms of training for us, it was very much DIY, but there was a lot of guidance from the Ex Libris project manager. And we worked through the documentation, and the good thing for us was having that collections view that we built ourselves. So for us, those two views really supported and reinforced our learning. We used the main library view that the project manager had built as a reference for building our collections view. And we were testing, training, planning in those two environments. So even though they were sort of for different purposes, they had very much related concepts. And that really helped us get our heads around, I guess, how Primo VE works, because it is obviously different from the new UI itself, and how it was configured, and the different terminology as well. So scopes instead of, search profiles instead of scopes, and slots instead of tabs, and getting our heads around that. So those two environments really helped us move along. So for implementation, VE is actually built on top of Alma production, but it's completely separate from the existing Primo. So it's very easy to do side-by-side comparisons. And that was the other part of our testing. And that testing ensured that search results for end users would still be relevant. And it also allowed us to understand how that relevancy ranking worked in VE, because it is different from the new UI. So we were really looking at replicating the exact same search in both Primo instances, the search results, looking at the filtering, how its functionality worked in terms of export, patron functions, single sign-on logins. For us, it was a very long journey. So going early meant there was there were a number of areas where functionality was still being built or it was being fixed. So from February to December 2018, we discovered a number of them, such as the course reserve search, that didn't show the same number of results. Some of the issues around Ferberization weren't resolved until the October release of Primo VE, and virtual browse, which was important for our users, wasn't released until December. So we obviously opted to wait for that functionality, so again, that our migration was as seamless as possible for end users. What was really good about this was, even being an early adopter, there was no pressure from Ex Libris for us to migrate until we were happy and we were ready to go. So by December 2018, we had just one issue left that we believed at that time was a showstopper, and that was around the normalization rules that we had put in place in the Primo back office to split the resource type of physical and electronic books, and also DVD versus online videos. And we'd done that using parameters, I guess, from the leader and the 008 fields in the MARC record. So it isn't possible to do, or wasn't possible to do, that within Primo VE. And we held out for 6 months before deciding that the other benefits of VE outweighed that remaining shortcoming. I have to note, I guess, that after launching Primo VE, there were no reports from end users that they missed that feature, but it is something that library staff still want, and that's particularly relevant at the moment because we're dealing with COVID-19. There's much more remote learning and teaching and reliance on electronic content. So staff have said, library staff have said it was much easier to point students to the filter that we had that just said ebooks than it is now. So it's a two-step process where people search and they need to filter by books and then filter again by available online. So as I said, after 6 months, we decided to restart the project with Ex Libris. So that kicked off I contacted them in March 2019, last year, and we set a new go live date of July. So we reviewed all the configurations we'd worked on throughout 2018, and that included things like the embedded search code. So what our website people were able to do was to incorporate that new search code into the library homepage for testing, and then they were able to publish that page into a staging status, I guess, for us to quickly switch across once we'd done the sanity check of Primo VE on go live day. So in planning for that, we had a project call with Ex Libris project manager, and by this time, because we'd had to pick it up, it was a new project manager who took us through to completion this time round. So we discussed with them the coordination of go live day, and that included the timing of switchover. So we actually requested that that be done at the end of their day, and that would make it ready for us to check when we started work on go live day. We also confirmed that task checklist, and that was posted to Basecamp. So Ex Libris, in terms of go live, would do the DNS switch. They would copy the eShelf information. They switched across the Leganto Primo integration. They activated Primo VE on the Premium Sandbox, and then also copied the analytics. So when we were reviewing the configurations, we realized at the last minute that we needed to republish our electronic holdings to Google Scholar, because that was actually something that we had overlooked doing when we moved from Primo Classic to the Primo New UI. And we needed to do that because that open URL was not going to redirect twice. So luckily for us, the Ex Libris project manager had checked the Google Scholar indexing schedule, realized that he would have to make that change or republish those records immediately, so it would hopefully re-index or re-index in time for our go live. But that was a bit of last minute panic that we had. So for go live itself, Ex Libris had made the switch at the time it was agreed. So we provided them a plan for what we would do on go live day as well, and that was combined with the checklist that they had worked through. So what our requirements were on go live day was obviously test that redirection to VE was working as expected. We tested the e-shells had been copied, tested that Leganto was all working, which it was. So everything was right to go for us to then switch across to the updated library homepage. We also updated in bulk all the embedded searches in that we had in LibGuides and any other links that we'd identified. And luckily for us, the Google Scholar indexing had actually updated in that time frame. So I guess we were lucky in that respect. So for our go live, no one noticed. And as I said, we wanted a seamless migration. And because no one noticed, I guess, thought that was a great success. So post go live, the issues that we encountered were very minimal. Some of them included that we found we could still log into the old Primo, so that needed to be disabled. Primo VE still needed to be activated on the premium sandbox. So we just posted those to Basecamp and they were rectified within the next day. So in the next few days after go live, we undertook some fine tuning and tweaking. Another thing that came about is more clarification about how VE worked was required for the librarians. I guess that once you go live and the questions coming from students raised a few more questions that perhaps hadn't been encountered whilst we were going through testing. And we also reviewed, obviously, the analytics data that had been copied. And we found some odd patterns in the historical data where months of expected high usage actually were too low. And again, Ex Libris rectified that by copying the data again. So for us, it was really a successful project, and just reflecting on, I guess, our thoughts on why we went through okay. So we found that documenting issues and questions in a Word document and also including screenshots helped the discussions in Basecamp and also the project calls. Another thing we did was actually kept a log or an issues log in our wiki. Then that allowed us to keep track of what had been raised as questions in Basecamp and things that had ended up being logged in Salesforce. And as those issues or new functionality was resolved, we could update that log and know exactly where we were up to. The other critical factor, I guess, was the testing and also the comparison testing between, the existing Primo and the Primo VE, and also those two views that we worked on. And again, that's reiterating, it really helped us understand how VE worked and what we needed to do to configure it. So just a recommended checklist of lessons learned from our implementation is really contact Ex Libris early and really plan early and I guess prepare well. Critical success factor, I guess, is determining and agreeing on those tasks, responsibilities and the timing of the cutover, and have as much prepared as possible so that it can be simply switched on when you're ready to switch across. So that for us was that embedded search code and having that library homepage ready to switch across when we were ready to go. A couple of things to be aware of. As I pointed out, we had not updated our links when we moved from Primo Classic, so they are not going to redirect again. The permalinks in the current or the new Primo version will not redirect to Primo VE. And the other thing is that saved searches, so users' saved searches can't be copied. So in summary, our users, our end users are very happy with it. We love our digital collections view, and since launching, we've continued to build that. It's very easy to configure new functionalities, such as, you know, the newspaper search, which was released last year, I think, and also rapidly deal with any interface changes, particularly now with the response to COVID-19 and library closures. So we've been able to quickly change forms, labels, and that display logic. We're really happy we've made the move, but would still like to see full flexibility and functionality, especially around the normalization rules. And I would say that parity with the Primo back office is still a must. So thank you. I shall stop sharing and hand over to Julie.
Thanks, Meredith. I'll just share my screen now. So hopefully everybody can see that. There we go. So I'm going to talk about our move to Primo VE, which is a little different to Meredith. Some of it you'll see is the same, similar, but we had a slightly different experience on our go live day. So I'll talk a little bit about, similar to Meredith, about the background, what we did pre-go live, then what happened on our go live day, and what's happened since. Before I start that, just a little bit about the University of Adelaide. We have nearly 27,000 students with 1,667 approximately staff. Majority of our students are based at our North Terrace campus, but we have other offshore locations and other campuses, and the teaching is across 5 faculties. There's a lovely picture of our main campus, North Terrace campus. Doesn't look like that quite today. And our newest building, which is down the other end of North Terrace, is in the medical precinct. So it's the Health and Medical Sciences building. So it's a little bit spread out, a bit of the old, bit of the new. So now into the main part. Why did we decide to move to VE? We had a few reasons. Up until I went to Igloo last year in August, I had been saying, no, let's not go yet. No, we're not going to go yet. It's not ready yet. There were a lot of reasons I was saying no, but at Igloo, I listened to some of the presentations there and thought that Primo VE was now much further along. So I came back and we had a discussion internally about the fact that it is a lot easier to configure. Another major factor is we're a Rapido development partner, and to go live with Rapido, you have to be on Primo VE. And in addition, we hadn't really done a lot of customization. So we decided to go live in February of this year. Some things to consider. We contacted Ex Libris about 2 or 3 months before the date we wanted to start. We also wanted to take longer than 1 month, which is what Ex Libris were putting on all of their documentation, that it would take a month to do this move to VE. But when we said, no, we're going to take longer, because we started around the end of last year and then didn't want to go live until February this year. So it was going to take us more than a month. They were all fine with that. There was no pressure whatsoever to actually go live. And they were very accommodating. We could change our go live date at any time. It wasn't necessarily locked right in. So we started, the start date was actually in November last year, and we had a kick-off call around the middle of November. And then we did Basecamp. We did some calls with Ex Libris, but not as probably not as well organised as Meredith's experience. And here I was just going to mention, even though I've said all of that, Ex-Libris have been working on a new model for moving to VE, which they're calling Go VE. There was a webinar last week on that, so if you haven't seen it, you might like to take a look. They are talking about a self-service type of model. We actually had a follow-up call with Ex-Libris after our go live and the problems we had, and we actually said we probably had a self-service model even though it wasn't supposed to be. So we received a checklist from Ex-Libris, which we thought was extremely basic. It wasn't actually clear what Ex-Libris would do for configuration. And that's one of the things we reported back to Ex-Libris at the end of our experience, is that just be really upfront about what it is that is going to be in VE once we get it. We had probably expected more and we got less. We used Basecamp, as I said, but we had to chase up on our questions. We had verbal updates in calls, but nothing in writing about dates, even though we asked a number of times. We were advised by our Ex-Libris implementer, I'm not sure that she was called project manager, but that everything would work beautifully on go live day, all the redirects would happen, because we did update when we moved to the new UI, we did update our links. We did have some staff do some testing and comparing VE with our existing view. But for some reason, our staff didn't seem to be that keen on providing feedback. So we just said, well, we're going to go with it. The testing that was done, we felt was quite adequate. And we didn't really have any issues, but you can't really test all your links until you go live. So that's one of the problems. So we then asked Ex-Libris for a go live checklist, and we got a short list of things that Ex-Libris said they would do and some things we would do, but there was no timing at all of when they would or should be done. Yes, in hindsight, we probably should have pushed that a little harder, but hindsight is a wonderful thing. So we didn't do that, and we had an unusual experience on Go Live, but we used DSpace as well, and we wanted to make sure that links to that DSpace were, well, not links, but our loading of the DSpace records was going to work. And when we started to do that, we had problems, we had an issue. We were told that there were too many records to load up, so we actually ended up, Ex-Libris did offer to do it for us, but we said, no, it's fine, we can do it. So we actually ended up creating a little hack so that it loaded in subsets. So we have reported that back to Ex-Libris product management, who said it shouldn't have happened, it shouldn't have been a problem. We wanted to go live prior to the start of the academic year, just in case there were problems, hence the February date. So our go live date was the 3rd of February. We were advised by our Ex-Libris implementer that what we would get in our Primo VE sandbox was actually out of the box configuration. So we wanted to make sure that we stuck with our 3rd of February date, because there was a refresh of our premium sandbox scheduled for the 9th of February. And we felt it was important to have our own configuration in the sandbox. Since then, we've been advised by Ex-Libris that that is not actually correct. We would have got the configuration that was in the Primo VE at the time they updated our sandbox. And then, so that would have been on go live date. So it's not an issue, but they made it sound like an issue at the time. And our Ex-Libris implementer left the company on the Thursday before we were to go live on the Monday. And there wasn't any real handover that we were involved in. So our go live date was supposed to be the end of our day. and they had said that it was going to be the end of our day because that would suit their staffing, and we said that's fine. But what we found was that they actually did the switch of the DNS at 5:30 a.m. our time on the Monday, and we started to see problems immediately. Leganto didn't work. We had problems with Rapid ILL. It was using our old view instead of a new one, and I'll say maybe we left it too late to switch to a new view, although Ex Libris, should have sort of taken some of this into consideration. Our open URLs from PubMed were using the wrong view, and the redirect from the old host name to the new one, we had issues with Firefox and Safari. So there were a lot of problems on that day. Our users were impacted during the day, and it took all day to resolve the issues. So as you can see, quite a different experience, the one that Meredith had. Post go live, we had no negative responses. Nothing came from the users until actually extremely recently, as in the last week or two. And it's mainly around the favourites, the labels and scrolling that they're reporting. Some of that we've reported to Ex Libris, and they've come back to say that's the way it's designed. And in other cases, it's with development. Some of the good things about VE, we seem to make able to make all the changes that we need. Quite a few of the issues we had with Primo back office are still there because it's our data, and we're working on that. We still actually have problems with Primo Analytics, even though we went live in February. Not all of the data's there. We're seeing additional views that in our Primo Analytics data. I might add, it is only the data that's copied over. So if you created scheduled reports or anything like that in Primo back office for analytics for your reports, they won't be copied over, which we weren't told about. So we were able to still access our Primo back office up until recently. I haven't tried in the last couple of weeks, but we still have access to it. So we can still go there and see what reports we set up and replicate that in Alma. And as I said, after we went live, we had a call with Ex Libris to talk about our experience. And I think really it comes down for us, it comes down to poor communication and poor project management. Unfortunately, that person who was doing all of the Ex Libris side of things wasn't communicating with us. When we got onto calls, there were no updates. It was like, oh, I've seen your issues in Basecamp, but I haven't had a chance to work on them yet. So I think that was really the reason for our bad experience on go live date. In summary though, we do love Primo VE. It is really easy to configure. And yes, you do see the changes immediately, which is fantastic. Basecamp is good, but it's only good if you use it correctly. We ended up with one very long message thread with a whole lot of problems in it, and that was very difficult to follow through to see what was being resolved and what was still outstanding, and so we had to do a little bit of work in that area. And we're still not sure why it's taken so long to get our Primo Analytics data moved across. And as I said, we're still seeing other views from other customers for some reports. So that's our experience. Doesn't sound great, does it? But we do love Primo VE, and I think it was the right decision. It was just a bad experience on the go live date. So do we want to go to some questions now, or other people who've moved over to Primo VE themselves who'd like to comment on their experience?
Julie and Meredith, we have one question around favourites from Rachel, LTU. So Rachel, has Julie's comments answered your question there about favourites, or is there something more that you'd like?
No, she did answer them. Thank you.
There's been a few comments in the chat where people have had the same experience with Basecamp, not being clear on configuration, the same experiences that University of Adelaide had. And a comment from ACU that Basecamp means you don't have a record of your project at the end. It's all kept by the Basecamp licensee. And from Bond University, from Peter at Bond University, they logged a new conversation for each question or issue and numbered them with 1, 2, 3 at the beginning of each. Stacey has a comment for analytics, a question. Do you lose just your schedules or do they not even migrate your OBI configured reports?
They don't migrate the reports at all. They only migrate the data. I just went in and recreated them. I had to go in. Luckily, we didn't have many. I went in and recreated them.
Bond have had a similar experience to USC, but they did drive some of the methods of using Basecamp. So Deborah Fitchett at Lincoln, we've got a number of OAI feeds we harvest into Primo with some semi-complex norm rules. I've had the impression this is trickier to set up in Primo VE. Has this changed? So I don't know if Meredith or Julie or anyone else on the call, if you'd like to comment on that, unmute and comment.
I haven't seen anything different. As I said, our harvesting for DSpace was problematic for the initial load because they said, well, the reason came back that there were too many records. But I don't know whether Xlibris has addressed that since.
So is that harvesting directly from DSpace into Primo VE, or do you have to?
Yes.
Yeah. Stacey has asked, have they advised on any subsequent work to be with more complete checklists based on your feedback?
I hope so. Personally, I hope so. I mean, I've had a quick look at the presentation that they did on this new Go VE, and I think, you know, the idea there, they can't really scale up with the amount of manual work that I think they do behind the scenes, or did for us, to copy stuff across from views and so forth, because that's what they told us they were doing. They were doing it manually. But there isn't, and Xlibris has said from day one, it's not really a true migration. It's different structures in the two, so you can't necessarily migrate.
Oh.
And we took the opportunity, we took it as a learning opportunity. We decided that even though Xlibris kept saying, well, we can do that for you, we said, no, we can do it. I mean, it is really easy to use the configuration. So we just sort of thought, well, it's a good learning opportunity for us, and we know then how it's actually set up.
Yeah.
But again, they may have done some work in that area. I would recommend, if anybody's looking to move, that they look at that presentation from last week, because it does look like they're talking about having more checklists. They're talking about having some mechanism to move some of the things across for you. But a lot of it is, they call it, they told us it was going to be a self-service type model, but there still needs to be involvement from Xlibris on your go live date. So you still have to schedule that date with them.
Yeah. There's a question from John Banbury. We use several mapping tables in normalization rules during harvest. Are mapping tables available in VE?
Do you want to answer that one, Meredith?
In terms of I mean, I can only comment on the resource types that we wanted to not harvest so much. And there is a limitation on fields. I think last year they may have brought more functionality in that space that I got quite excited about, but it was still only using like one mark field at a time rather than a combination. So there's still limitations in that. I'm not sure that that specifically answers your question though.
I think that they are improving those areas, and that's what really was the tipping point for us, was being able to set things up the way we wanted and to do that sort of mapping, and very easy to change things, but there are still a few limitations in that area.
And was that where you invested the most of the time in the migration or the move to VE? Reviewing the normalisation rules or reapplying them?
I don't know that that was the most for us. I mean, I think it was just across the board. We, like Meredith said at the beginning of her presentation, we were really trying to make it as seamless as possible for our users. So we were constantly doing that comparison between what does it look like for this search in Primo, but with the classic or the Primo new UI as opposed to VE. And if we couldn't work out what to do to make it look the same, then we would contact Ex Libris and ask them for some help or guidance. And the majority of that was fairly straightforward. And then once we started having staff looking at some of the displays, and so the results list and the detailed results, if they saw something missing in the details, a uniform title, I think, was one of the things that we'd missed mapping through. So we went in and fixed that, and it's fairly straightforward. And personally, I love the fact that you just change it and it's done. It's like you don't have to complicate anything. It's just automatically, it's automatically there within a matter of minutes.
There's a question from Steve Yiend. Is there any noticeable search performance difference between Primo VE and Primo Back Office new UI?
We haven't actually noticed anything, no.
In terms of, you know, responsiveness, it's the same. And just going back to the algorithm and the testing and the comparison testing that we did with each of the interfaces and doing exactly the same search, we wanted to make sure that the results were similar. So you might see, you know, a record in the current, like the existing Primo, that might be, you know, record number 2. It might appear either first or it might be 5th, but we found that those results were similar for the first 10 results on that first page. So we were happy to accept that. I think what we had to keep in mind, and the librarians needed to keep in mind when they were testing, is the end user is not going to have both interfaces and be able to see those differences, and even if they wanted to. So it's more, I guess, reiterating that it's a discovery service, it's a slightly different algorithm, but making sure that those results were reasonably, you know, the same.
Okay, that's all of the questions that we had in the chat. Is there anything else that people would like to ask? Or comments? If not, then I'd like to thank Meredith and Julie for this morning's presentation. And yes, it's been a really enjoyable session. Great to have everyone together. Thanks everyone for your engagement and your comments and chat. And we'll have a recording available that you can access from the ANZREG website. So round of applause and thank you to everyone. Especially to Julie and to Meredith. Okay, and have a good day, everyone. Thank you.
Thanks,
Bye.
Sue.